I have come here to chew bubblegum and kick ass. And I'm all out of bubblegum.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Real Estate Realities with the Rebel Broker. My name's Robert Whitelaw, and I am the Rebel Broker, licensed real estate broker in the state of California, member of the National Association of Real Tours. But please, don't hold that against me. Welcome to it, folks. I was trying to figure out some creative way to talk about The Walking Dead in today's show. I don't know who else follows that show, but man, the last one was a good one. If you're someone who's into the show and you've DVR'd it and you haven't watched it yet, make sure to see it before you get any spoilers, because it's a good one. Lots of things happen. So just a little help from me to you. Once again, helping you all navigate through all the informative news items floating around out there on the internets relating to real estate. The first one for today is aimed solidly at folks who are in the rental market, and that could be you as a renter, it could be you as a landlord, it could be you as someone who's thinking about becoming a landlord. This is almost the kind of news that makes you wonder if you've missed the boat, simply because it's obviously showing a very peak moment. But here in San Jose, a new report has found that the real estate market in the South Bay has the lowest residential vacancy rate in the United States, with 99.8% of homes being occupied, which is astounding. The site RealtyTrack found at the beginning of February, only 858 out of 443,387 homes in the San Jose metropolitan statistical area were unoccupied, a vacancy rate of 0.2%. The company found 78% of the vacant homes had equity, a sign of the area's booming real estate market. Not to be outdone, or maybe just outdone a little, San Francisco was showing only 0.3% of homes in the market being unoccupied. Quote, "This is a very good time to be a seller of real estate throughout the Bay Area, and it's not a bad time to be a landlord because you can take care of your vacancies very quickly." Other major cities with low vacancy rates include Los Angeles, Boston, and Denver. Nationally, these same folks found 1.6% of the nation's residential properties were vacant in their last analysis, down 9.3% from late last year. Flint, Michigan has the highest home vacancy rate in the country, as they're dealing with their water supply problem. But even then, even this number isn't crazy. Homes are vacant at a rate of only 7.5%. So only 7.5% of the homes in Flint, Michigan are vacant. That's mind-boggling. That is a tight market. Anything under 10%. You know, whenever I do calculations on expected income on rental properties, I usually go, depending on how strong things are, I'm typically giving estimates in the range of anywhere from 10 to 5% vacancy rate, just so I get a little bit of a buffer, which wouldn't come anywhere close to this. All I got to do is put a 1 in there for vacancy rate, and I've got it covered by quite a huge chunk. So what does this tell us? Clearly it tells us the vacancy rates are exceptionally low. But one thing that it does tell us is in these areas where vacancy rates are ridiculously low, it's probably going to be really tough to find properties that you can purchase at positive cash flow for renting. Unless you build in a lot of padded rent, right? Which would be concerning for me, because I think then you start to lean into the probability that you're going to have to lower your rent at some point down the road. Just like we've got vacancy rates that are ridiculously low right now, we have seen points where vacancy rates go up, which would negatively affect the more expensive rental properties. And if you end up having to lower your rent to the point where it's not positive cash flow, well, that's not a very good thing. So what this might be is just like we were discussing with home purchases, this might be a situation for folks that are in bedroom community style cities to places like San Francisco, really reconsidering the option of renting. I think most owners of properties right now would be ridiculously surprised by two things. One, how much they could rent their house for. In my experience, the websites out there that are giving you estimates on what you could rent your house for, because rents are going up at the rate they're going up, I think most of them are underestimating the amount. And you don't need a realtor to tell you this. In fact, probably most realtors can't tell you this, but what you can learn, go ahead and check a site like Zillow and see what it says your home would rent for. Just make sure the fundamentals are correct. Make sure it's got the right square footage, number of bedrooms and bathrooms, that kind of stuff, because that's, plays a part in how it estimates what your rent would be, what you would get for rent. But then what I suggest you do is call a local property management company and say, hey, here's where my home is located. It's X number of bedrooms, X number of bathrooms, X amount of square feet. Without me holding you to it too stringently, give me a ballpark figure on what you think this home would rent for. They're going to want to get an appointment and come and look at your place and all that other kind of wonderful stuff. Push a little bit and see if you can't have them give you a number, and see what they tell you the home would likely rent for. And I think you'll find that there's going to be a discrepancy between the two, and the property management firm is probably going to tell you a little bit higher. And of course, you'll want to do your own research, because there will be that one out of a certain number of property managers that might just tell you a higher number to get you to pick them to be their property manager. But always keep in mind that may be a tactic that some companies would do. But you want to get an idea. And if you don't want to actually talk to them about it, what you can do is almost all property management firms are going to have a website where you can then see if they have rentals in your specific neighborhood, see how much those are going for. And that kind of research is going to give you some really good insights into what you think your home can rent for. Now, I've used my home as an example in the past. And this time last year, after doing a little bit of that research, I found that I could probably rent my home for about $3,500 a month. This year, and we're not even quite 12 months. We're probably about 3 months away from it being 12 months. So not even a full solid year later. And I'm confident, based on what I'm seeing other properties renting for right now, that my property would actually rent for $4,000 a month if I were to put it on the rental market right now. And when I look at what's available, there isn't anything. And when I do find something that's available, within a few days, it goes away. So clearly, rentals are super strong right now, and they're not just strong in these ridiculously priced areas. They apparently are going strong in an awful lot of markets across the country. Now, of course, this is kind of a double-edged sword, right? You have to worry that you're at the very tippy top of a rental market. You have to try to figure out how much more headroom is there on this. Now, I've always said that do the math based on today's numbers, and then if it works for you, great. And if I were in this situation trying to buy a rental property, I would not only do the math, but I would also kind of calculate to myself, what if I need to take a cut in my rent? What if my because I don't think a $4,000 a month rent is sustainable for a relatively long period of time. My guess is that at some point it will go down a little bit. At some point market influences shift. So my guess would be I would need to, in my head, be willing to accept a drop in my rent to something like $3,800, just to give myself some leeway. Now, might that not happen? Might we just see rentals freeze where they are for an extremely long time? Sure, that could happen. And that could be a fairly reasonable assumption to make in a lot of the areas where I am. However, that may not be the case where you are. So you're going to want to look at trends. You want to try to get history. rental history for your areas and see how things plot out and see if, given the trends you're seeing, it feels like you're at the tippy top of a trend that might go back down. Try to see what the normal appreciation has been for rents in your area, and then calculate how different from the past the change was. Then, using the numbers before the big change, calculate what the rent in your area would be if rents had gone up at the historically normal rate, and pretend that's what the rent is that you could get for your property moving forward. So try to normalize the curve, right? And by normalize the curve, I mean make it straight. So right now we're looking at in a lot of marketplaces, a curve where it sort of gradually jogs up and down a little bit, but in general, you can put a line in there that gives you the average change. And then at some point, everything goes nuts and it starts to go vertical, right? Well, what I want you to do is go back to that historical line, draw a straight line all the way ahead, right through into the future, to kind of get an idea of what the longer-term history of increase in rents were, and then compare that to where rents are now. And calculate that as your worst case scenario rent, and have a plan. Decide before you ever even buy that property what you would do if the rent you could get for that property suddenly dropped down to that normalized level, right? In a lot of marketplaces, you're going to find that the drop isn't that bad. It's actually something that's fairly acceptable, but it's something you're going to want to consider. I think that at this point, in a lot of different areas, there's a higher probability that you're taking a slightly greater risk because you might be going into a rental market at the high point. But again, doing the math right, you can build in some protections. You can give yourself some wiggle room so that if things do turn down a little bit, you'll be able to adjust and still make positive cash flow. But let's pretend the worst case scenario happens. Let's pretend that the market shifts. And it's typically not going to shift immediately. This is typically something that happens over a longer period of time. So the odds are you're going to see this happening, and it's going to happen gradually. And at that point, what do? Well, if you bought the house right, and we're guessing that you did, you've been making money on it all along. Well, maybe it just becomes time for you to sell it if that's the situation you find yourself in. So there's no real downside. You given the way you probably bought it, given the way you've been using it, you've made money. You've probably built up equity in the property. You can probably turn around and sell it, or you could even approach your renter and ask them if they want to buy the property. So I don't think you need to assume that because you are buying at the top of the market in terms of expectations for rent, that completely eliminates your option of becoming a landlord. I think it just means that you approach it smartly and decide on some tactics you might use if things invert. Or let's say you see a 10% drop in rents, or what you can get for rent. So then maybe that's your bailout number. You figure out what that bailout number is, and as soon as you cross it, or as soon as the marketplace crosses it, right? Because it's going to depend on the status of your current tenant. Most tenants are going to start to rent a place and then just keep going, right? It's very rare that tenants apparently go out and shop rent for other places. But you'll always want to be sort of in this mode to calculate where you stand as a landlord as the end of a lease period approaches. So if you've got a 1-year, 2-year lease and you're within 3 or 4 months of that, you're going to want to calculate what the likely rent you're going to be able to get if that person leaves after they vacate. There's always a chance they'll do their homework and they'll figure out that they should be paying less in rent, and they may ask you for that. And just have that all in mind and decide in your head at what point the decision gets made to flip that switch and change from being a landlord to being someone offering your property up for sale. But this is clearly showing, the numbers here clearly show that this is a pretty dramatic across the country thing. So keep that in mind as part of your strategy as you move forward. Okay, another thing I wanted to chat about today, and of course this is something that just keeps coming up. We've been talking about the self-driving car, the automated car, two more little tidbits. I'll have articles for these. I'm not going to go into a lot of depth on these, but I think that they're interesting to note because the last time we talked about this, we were discussing news items relating to why there was no way that this was going to happen and that there were going to be huge delays for automated driving, and we should all not expect it to be happening as fast as the hype seems to indicate. Well, from Autoblog, Google's self-driving car project is currently on a hiring spree. Google is ramping up its autonomous vehicle program by posting a series of job openings. So clearly Google is in high gear in terms of making all this move forward. So that's little news item number one. Put a pin in that. Next, and this one's beautiful because whenever something comes up that just absolutely fits with what we've been talking about, I like to wave that flag a little bit. U.S. regulators, Google's self-driving car AI can be a driver. Quote, U.S. regulators say Google's self-driving car can be considered the driver under federal law, which is a big step towards approval for self-driving cars to take to the roads. This completely stands at odds against what was the primary argument of the article we covered the other day, where that regulators were going to spend forever figuring this stuff out. My position was that that's not the case. They'll absolutely simply push right through that. There's simply too much momentum politically for this to go. This is the Solyndra of the decade. Everybody was hot for solar power. The government gave them backed loans. Basically, the taxpayer co-signed for Solyndra loans and all these other kinds of wonderful things. Now the government is convinced that self-driving cars are the way to go, so they are absolutely going to pave the way for this to happen. According to this, safety regulators have told Google of its decision last week. Google submitted a proposed design for a self-driving car back in November, which has no need for a human driver. Right? No need for a human driver. So we even gave in to the point when we were discussing this on this show that, well, maybe for some period of time a human person must be in the pilot's seat, not necessarily paying attention, but there to take control in case something bad happens. But apparently that's being leapfrogged. That whole period of time is being leapfrogged. The response from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration was that will interpret driver in the context of Google's described motor vehicle design as referring to the self-driving system and not to any of the vehicle occupants. The regulator said, quote, "We agree with Google. Its self-driving car will not have a, quote, driver in the traditional sense that vehicles have had drivers during the last more than 100 years. Google and many car companies are looking to free up safety rules that are slowing down testing and eventual rollout of autonomous vehicles. As Reuters notes, California has drafted rules of a steering wheel and licensed driver in all self-driving cars. So in California, there still has to be a steering wheel and a licensed driver in the car. But, you know, a self-driving car, the only time it wouldn't have a driver in it or wouldn't have a human in it is if it's sort of the automated version of an Uber, right? And you call for it to come pick you up and it's not occupied when it comes to get you. So that might be a problem that California will have to deal with. But from a federal standpoint, the road, so to speak, has been opened for this. Google told the NHTSA that human controls could paradoxically be a danger if passengers attempt to override the car's own judgments and driving decisions. Rules about steering wheels and brake pedals would have to be formally rewritten before cars without them would be allowed on the roads, and changing the law will take months, if not years. So the problem here isn't that this will prevent this from happening. The problem is that these manufacturers will have to build cars with all the old controls in them, despite the fact that they're completely autonomous. So I think that all just speaks to the fact that this is on the fast track. This stuff's all going to happen. The feds are lining up. You've got a few states that maybe have some rules that need to be worked over, but really expecting this to get slowed down, I think, is not horribly realistic, unless there's some ridiculously horrible tragedy that occurs as a result of this. Next, and this is another one we're not going to spend a whole lot of talking about. I just thought it was a really good article on negative interest rates. It's a map that shows interest rates all across the country, all across the world, and you can click on it and get more information. It's really kind of cool. It also discusses Sweden's Riksbank, which was the first major monetary authority to go ahead and do negative interest rates. It's also the oldest central bank, but that goes on to do a very good discussion of it. Again, I'm not going to jump into it here, but if it's something you're interested in reading about more, this is going to be a great one. So you'll want to go to the show notes and click on the link to this particular article. Now, finally, I wanted to jump in on this one because I think it's timely when we're in a period where folks are really going to be thinking about selling their property to address the idea of doing for sale by owner. And I realize that as a real estate broker guy, my response should be you should always get a real estate agent. And I'm going to be honest enough to say that may not always be necessary. It really depends on your level of comfort with the process. Maybe you were a licensed real estate agent at one point. By the way, even if your license has expired, in most states you need to disclose that you were a real estate agent. I know in California it's assumed that you're actually at a disadvantage if you were ever licensed because it's assumed that you have a higher level of sophistication than anyone else involved in the process if they weren't also licensed at one time or another. So the burden is on you to make sure this all happens right if you were ever a licensed real estate agent. There's several myths they lay out here, and I thought we'd just share them and maybe chat about them a little bit and see how they apply. Myth number one, you will sell your home faster than anyone else. The reality is that nearly 90% of home buyers use an agent to find a property. That's your number one problem, and I think that's the number one thing that stands against you. Most people use Realtor.com or Real Estate Agent and find their properties using the real estate agent's resources. As a for sale by owner, your home will not show up on Realtor.com, for instance, because it's not listed. Only homes that are listed with a realtor are going to show up on Realtor.com. It is the most used tool for buyers to find properties, period. You are eliminating a huge number of potential buyers by not having your home listed on the multiple listing service. It is the single greatest advantage to listing your home with a real estate agent. So, what does that mean for you? Well, as a for sale by owner person, you can try to overcome this by getting yourself listed on Zillow and Trulia. You can go onto Craigslist. There's a lot of different online resources you can use. You'll never reach the sheer volume of people as you would if you went with the MLS, particularly because you get listed in your local MLS, and when you do all this internet stuff, you're basically putting it out there for everybody to see. When you put it on your local MLS, the folks who are actually searching actively in your area are getting notified preemptively. So in other words, these folks who are actively searching, active buyers, tend to have a search engine running with a real estate agent. So as soon as your listing gets entered into the MLS, the data for your home gets emailed to that buyer within anywhere from 5 minutes to 24 hours, depending on how frequently they have set up to get updates. That's a very powerful tool. So it's hard to underestimate how important that is. The majority of calls that you're going to get as a for sale by owner person are going to be from agents. Agents are busy looking for homes for their buyers and homes to list and market. If your home isn't listed, it is practically invisible to those 90% of buyers. This drastically reduces your buyer pool, which we just discussed. It is difficult to sell your home faster and for more money by only marketing it to 10% of the active buyers in the market. I'm trying to think, who's this from? I think this is actually a realtor's site where this is being covered. It's not 10%. You're not limiting yourself to 10%. Are you reaching the same number you would if you were on the MLS? No. But through sites like Zillow and Trulia, where you can list your home for sale. In fact, right now I went ahead and just pulled up the Zillow for sale by owner. Just in the area that I'm looking, if I zoom right in, let's see, if I zoom right into my area here, let's see. So just the South San Jose, Morgan Hill area, there are 1,430 results that are coming up. And it's super easy to find. It just depends on whether or not the people find it using this particular tool. Will tons of people potentially see it? Absolutely. Will as many people see it as would if you had it listed on the MLS? No. And as we all know, it's the number of eyes that get on the property that are going to determine whether or not you get multiple offers, how much over asking price you're going to get, those kinds of things. So in that realm, if you're really and in addition to that, for doing things like Zillow and Trulia and that kind of stuff, you also need to be willing to own the marketing process. Now, I realize there's an awful lot of realtors out there that simply do the throw it against the wall and see what sticks marketing. Basically, they put it on the MLS. They let it get aggregated to a bunch of other sites. Aggregation simply means that there are sites out there that go to the Realtor.com database and pull the new listings. That Zillow does that. Trulia does that. There's actually a ton of different sites that do that. So Yahoo Real Estate does that. So you're getting on all of those sites plus the MLS site. It just means you suddenly manually have to go out and get your home on as many sites as possible, plus do whatever other marketing that should be done. And that's going to be unique for your real estate folks. A lot of folks, as I said, simply put you on the MLS and leave it at that. Others do sort of more targeted marketing towards buyers that have a higher potential to be interested in what your specific home has to offer. And the other thing is, I get where this comes from. A lot of folks who want to sell their property are convinced that their realtor is simply not earning the money. And you know what? The sad truth is, in the vast majority of cases, that is absolutely true. The folks who simply list it and put it on the MLS aren't really earning your money, or earning the money that they're doing. My feeling is, if I'm charging you a 6% commission for the sale of your home, my involvement should at the very least make you 6.1% more than what you would get if you didn't use me. In other words, I want my involvement to not only pay for itself, but then also actually save you a little money. Now, of course, sometimes that's not always an easy calculation. Through my process, I try to make it as easy as possible for you and lots of other types of things. And there's obviously a monetary value that goes along with that. But in general, that's the philosophy I'm going for. Myth number 2, you will walk away with more money in your pocket. This may or may not be true depending on what your market is like. What this says, and this is, as I look at this, I see this is clearly from a realtor's website from Keller Williams. So clearly they're going to very much push the whole realtor thing. Their point is homes listed with agents sell for 32% more than for sale by owners, according to studies. Agent-assisted homes sell for an average of 32% more than at FSBO sales. So same sentence twice, which means when you think you are saving 5 to 6%, you're actually losing 26%. In addition, a majority of buyers that look at for sale by owners are expecting a discount on the purchase of a for sale by owner by the usual commission. Unfortunately, both buyer and seller can't receive a discount, so you probably have to budge if you want to sell. So that's a little heavy-handed. In a lot of marketplaces, that's absolutely true. You will simply not get that much. But right now, in most areas, if you live in an area where homes are selling for multiple offers, 2, 3, 4 offers on just about everything that comes on the market, if things are selling ridiculously quickly, you can bet that the buyers out there are probably subscribing to all the different services they can find to find out about properties. So one truth is that folks are absolutely hoping that they can save a little bit of money when working with a for sale by owner. But the bottom line is that's not necessarily it works against you either. If you go ahead and take 3% off of your list price to make it more attractive, you're still saving yourself money. And in the right marketplace, if you do the marketing correctly, you're going to make that money back. But again, remember that as the seller, the burden on you to provide all of the required disclosures still exists. You don't have access to all of the realtor-provided documents and disclosures. So you kind of have to feel your way through that, and you want to make sure you're doing everything that's required of you by law. Or if something goes wrong, or even years after the close of escrow, something crops up that the buyer feels you should have known about and should have told them about, you could find yourself getting sued. So there is that aspect to it as well. You're sort of buying yourself a little insurance by working with an agent as well. Myth number 3, you will sell your home better than anyone. So I'm a bit of a fan of the neutral third party. I find that most people have a really hard time seeing their home that they've lived in for so many years through sort of the pale light of a first-time viewer. Or and this, I've got a few stories I've told on this show about folks who really loved the mural of a mermaid on the living room wall and thought that was fantastic. And, for the way they lived and the way they enjoyed their home, it absolutely was. For probably 80 or 90% of buyers out there, or maybe even 95% of buyers out there, that's not an ideal thing. That is something that they're going to start thinking about how many times they're going to have to paint that wall before they can't see it anymore. So having that third-party person who is has an eye more towards making your home attractive to the largest number of people is a good thing to have. Because you've kind of got an emotional investment in the property, and it's very difficult for a lot of folks to take that step back and see it as a product that they're trying to present to someone. Myth number 4, you will sell your home, period. I actually think this data is not quite right. This is data that was correct probably about 10 years ago, but I don't think it's true. He says 95 or 90% of for sale by owner sellers go on to list their home with a realtor. Now, I know that number is still exceptionally high. It's at least 80-something%. But the reality is that by and large, the responsibility or the difficulty or the process ends up being too involved, and folks end up bringing in a real estate agent. Now, sometimes this happens because as a for sale by owner person, a real estate agent had a client interested in your property, and so they approached you and said, hey, listen, if you're willing to cooperate with me, I'll bring in a buyer, and we'll take care of this whole thing. I'll get the paperwork going. And then they may have done a deal. They may have said, you know what, I'll charge you some very low, something far less than 6%, and you're still saving money. You're still making sure you're getting all the right paperwork done, and I do it for you. I've seen a lot of that happen in the past with deals that were for sale by owner to begin with, but then the agent brought in a potential buyer and simply sort of negotiated with the seller ahead of time. You'll have a lot less hassle. I'm not even going to read what this person wrote for the response to this one. I think that's absolutely true. You won't. I think the point he's making is true. You actually have a lot more hassle when you don't have a real estate agent. The escrow I'm working on right now is a perfect example. There have been nothing but problems with the escrow that I'm working on now. Completely external. Not the fault of the seller, not the fault of the buyer, not my fault, but things that simply had to get dealt with, things that had to be arranged, things that had to be organized. You had to get proper professionals in to deal with certain things. So this has been a very involved process. And if my buyer had to deal with this, I'm fairly convinced at this point it would have died. They just don't have enough hours in the day. They have to work their job and do what they do, and they just don't have the resources to focus on getting these things solved in a timely fashion. So it's making a deal close can potentially be a huge hassle, very stressful. So an agent that's doing their job correctly is absolutely saving you that hassle. But let's step away from this for a second and absolutely try to take it in as a bigger picture. Of course, these folks are always going to push. Real estate people in general are always going to push for you to choose the option that employs them, right? Whether it's the Realtor.com talking about it or whether it's real estate agents talking about it. The truth is, if you want to critically analyze your ability to work through a real estate transaction, and you come to the conclusion that you can handle it, you create a plan, you make sure to do the research up front, you can absolutely potentially save yourself a huge chunk of money in terms of the commission. You won't save, if you were going to go ahead and sign on for a listing with 6%, you're not going to save yourself 6%. I don't think it's as crazy as he makes out here, at least not in the marketplace we have now. But I think you actually do end up making a little bit less than if you had used an agent. Is it the full 6%? Probably not, given the way the market's working right now. if I were to decide I'm not going to be a real estate agent anymore and I decided to sell my house next year, I would absolutely, and I didn't have access to any of the MLS, so I lost all my realtor privileges, I would absolutely sell my home as a for sale by owner. Simply because I have a lot of faith in my ability to market it. However, just like I suggest with anything else, just like we were talking about rentals at the top of the show, have a plan and have a point at which you say, you know what, I'm not pulling this off. So maybe I do need to get a real estate agent to come in here and deal with it for me. So how do you figure out what that is? As a person who is interested in doing a for sale by owner, who feels like you've got the skills to make it happen, what should be the benchmarks that you judge yourself by? Well, first, at the beginning of the process, you should talk to 3 or 4 agents and be honest with them. Say, I'm interviewing 3 or 4 agents. I'm considering doing a for sale by owner, and I want to get you a market analysis. I want you to tell me what you would do to market my home and how much you think you could get for it. They'll come in. They'll give you all that information. They'll tell you how long they think it'll be on the market. Part of the process should be how many days on the market. So set up some realistic numbers for yourself. Now, of course, there's 2 things you need to think about. One is the realistic numbers plus what fits with your schedule. If you're on some sort of a tighter schedule, you're going to want to have maybe some benchmarks in place that kick in faster, because you don't want to find yourself in a situation where you're not selling it fast enough, or you make the decision to engage a real estate agent, but the amount of time it normally takes to get a home sold is now longer than what you absolutely needed the home to be sold by. Because in a case like that, the agent may have to try to price it lower to get more aggressive attention on the property earlier in the process, if the markets are relatively soft where you are. Figure out what it is. There's a variety of numbers to judge yourself on. How many people have called to view the property? What kind of a response have you been getting from the sign in the front yard? What kind of a response have you been getting from the efforts you've been putting in to get your home sold? So as we said, use those websites. Do some direct mail pieces. If you're trying to sell a 4-bedroom, 2-bath, 1,300 square foot house, see if you can't get a list in your city of homes that have 2 bedrooms. Try to get a mailing list of folks who currently rent. You could send it to all of the units in an apartment complex. These are ways that you can market your property to the folks most likely to want to buy your home. Do all of that stuff and give yourself 2 to 3 weeks to see how things go. Of course, taking into account what the typical time on market is for you. Do open houses. Advertise the open house. Put signs out. Directional signs need to go out to at least the first major thoroughfare to your house. So if you've got a 2 or 3 lane street out there somewhere, put the first sign out there, then the next sign for the next turn to get down to your street, and then the next sign in front of your house. Whatever number you need to go get open house signs. You can buy those at Home Depot. Jump through these hoops. Do it all as well as you possibly can, and judge your results. If you don't get the results you want, if no one wants to make an offer on the property, if you're not getting anywhere, that's the point you need to make the decision and say, you know what, I probably do need to have a real estate agent do this. So at that point, you can go back to the folks you interviewed, and if there was one that really stood head and shoulders above the rest in terms of results you think they can get for you, go ahead and call them up, have them come in and do the job for you. And just make sure they understand that you're going to be judging them by the same criteria you were judging yourself. And if they're not getting results for you, just like you were willing to fire yourself when the results didn't happen, be willing to fire them and move on to somebody else who's going to be more aggressive. Or at the very least, definitely reevaluate your situation and figure out why your home isn't selling. If you get to the point where you've been on the market for what is the average for your area and you haven't even had a nibble, you're going to want to reevaluate. It may be that you've overpriced your home doesn't have the amenities you think it does. There's something holding that property back. But in any event, I hope that was helpful. I have no problem with folks wanting to do for sale by owner. I'm only interested in working with clients who want to work with me. I'm not the guy who tries to strong arm you into working with me. I don't think that's a fiduciary thing to do, so I don't do it. But I hope that works. I hope that gives you some insights and helps you come up with a strategy that might let for sale by owner work for you. And if it doesn't, just be willing to take that step and go ahead and engage a real estate agent that you trust who's going to get those goals achieved for you. All right, folks, if you'd like to get in contact with me, the best way to do that is to head on over to www.therebelbroker.com. Go ahead and click on the Contact the Rebel Broker link in the upper right-hand corner. Send me your message. I'll be happy to reply. And, of course, as always, if you'd like to support the show, go ahead and use iTunes or whatever else you use to listen to the show and give it a rating or a review. That's the best way to help the show grow. And, I'd like to thank everybody because we're just seeing consistent growth even during that time period when I wasn't able to do shows because of the surgery on the knee or because I was sick. We continue to see growth in this show. In fact, every month we've seen continued growth. And I think we actually last month broke I think we got just shy of 11,000 downloads last month. And that's great. That's huge growth. We're seeing regular growth every month. And that only happens because you all are spreading the word for me. And I deeply appreciate it. Thank you very much, everyone. And I'll talk to y'all next time.